Hey, startup founders. In this episode of Meet an Investor, we sit down with Tony Clemendor, a startup coach at the Founders Forge, a former entrepreneur, and member of Harvard Business School Alumni Angels Association. As a former member of the deal selection committee at the NorCal chapter of HBS Angels, Tony talks about how to apply to the angel group, how the deal selection process works, and what to do if the angels expressed an interest in writing you a check. We also had a lively discussion about a ton of founder issues, from go-to-market to product market fit and to pitch decks. Tony's helped a lot of founders overcome many of these problems, so you definitely want to listen closely as he shares wisdom from decades in the startup space. Let's get started. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. I'm Sam Wong, and we are here for the next episode of our Meet an Investor session. We have, in this fireside chat, the pleasure of having Tony Clemendor from the Founders Forge. So Tony's here, and Tony, please introduce yourself to everybody.
Hi. First of all, Sam, thanks for having me. I'm flattered to be here. My name is Tony Clemendor. I was an operator, founder for about 30 years, actually. Started my first company right out of business school, sold my last company back in 2010. And since then, have been trying to help founders avoid a lot of the pain and agony that I personally went through as a first-time startup founder when I didn't know what I didn't know. In the 30 years that I've sort of been doing what I do, I've learned a lot of why it was so painful for me the first time, and the second time a little less painful, and the third time even less painful than that. And I, at this point, still work with a lot of founders, both as an investor and sort of evaluating startups for pitch competitions and that sort of thing. And my mission in life right now is to try and help founders avoid all the easily avoidable and common mistakes that I see day in and day out that feel like nails on a blackboard when I see them. So that's it.
Right, right. So Tony and I were just catching up a little bit before we opened it up for everybody on this call, and I was saying that to provide a little bit of context, I met Tony about 4 or 5 years ago. He was a pitch judge, and if you've in the Silicon Valley, if you're doing the startup thing, you're probably engaged in. You've seen some pitch competitions, you've seen a demo day. There are a lot of people who can show up as investors, as pitch coaches, who will give feedback at these sessions. Tony stood out because he gave some of the best feedback consistently, um, uh, not just to one entrepreneur pitching, but to everybody. Okay, and I've since served as a pitch judge with Tony, I think, on a couple of Pitch Force events, and I've just observed Tony because he does a very good job. So I think what I would say is pay close attention to his insights. Besides being very bright and intelligent, he's got a great academic background. He's got some great business background, but it's not just that he's a quote unquote great basketball player. What we need as founders is great coaching. Okay, not all great players make the greatest coaches. And I think from the evidence I've seen, Tony is a great coach. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Tony, tell us a little bit about what you're doing with the Founders Forge, and maybe a little bit more about your background. You said you work with the Founders Forge. I've got this slide here with your logo, as well as we'll talk about Harvard Business School Angels Association in a little bit. But then, I also saw that you're with Berkeley Skydeck, and Tony and I are both advisors at Skydeck as well. But tell us about what you're doing now.
Okay, so the Founders Forge basically started about 6 years ago. And before the Founders Forge, what had happened was after I sold my last company in 2010, I found myself working with a lot of the accelerators like 500 Startups, Women's Startup Labs, et cetera, sort of doing mentoring and advisory work for startup founders. And I was loving it. I got to tell you, there was no better job in the world than sort of helping founders to kind of, increase their chances of success and sort of avoid, again, the common mishaps. So about 6 years ago, I started the Founders Forge specifically because what I didn't like about the accelerator model was that I tended to only get to work as an advisor with companies for sort of a short time while they were in a cohort. And I wanted to have an opportunity to have a different kind of relationship with them, where I got to work with them sort of from the beginning of the problem through to the point where they were getting their traction, getting their success, et cetera. And so it didn't mean leaving them off at the end of the cohort. So in 2018, I started doing one-on-one coaching with typically first-time founders on a number of different things, not just sort of strategy and implementation, but also on things like the sense of overwhelm. When you're a founder and you've got a zillion things you can do and you're not sure what you should prioritize, on sort of how you tell your story, in terms of how you sort of think about building a team, and all of the things that they don't teach you typically in an academic setting, usually in college or business school, or that kind of thing. And so I was doing the one-on-one for the last 5 or 6 years. In conjunction, I was also continuing to do some office hours and working on pitch events. And I recognized that I felt a little bit like I wasn't touching enough founders. And so I recently launched a group program. But instead of trying to do a group program that, again, could holistically deal with what it's like to be a founder, I wanted to have one very specific goal. And so the group program that I launched was just designed to solve the chicken egg problem that I was hearing all the time, which is that founders say, I'm trying to raise money for my idea so that I can get some traction. But when I go to investors to get funding, they tell me that I need to have traction first. And so I said, you know what, there's a way out of this, which is that there are some very easy, simple techniques that you can use to get initial traction that'll put you in a position to be fundable. And so the group program is just about how do you help somebody that doesn't have a large team, doesn't have a large budget, doesn't have a lot of sales experience on their own. How do you help them break the inertia, get some initial paying clients, get some initial momentum so that they become fundable, or so that they have the option, if they want, to sort of bootstrap and just let revenues be the way that they build the company.
Yeah, that's some great context and background. We've seen the same problem with fundable startups, venture validated, the businesses that we run. So if you put that in context of your association with Harvard Business School Alumni Angels, you're an HBS alum yourself,
right?
Okay. How did the alumni the angel group there really? How was it structured? How many people were in it? Geographically, organizationally, whatever.
So Harvard Business School Alumni Angels actually has chapters all over the world. I think there's about 9 or 10 chapters. So I was associated with the Northern California chapter, and I was part of the selection committee. And so the way that it works is there's a lot of members who are alums who want to be angel investors who are members of the Angel Association, but within that there's a smaller core group that basically is sort of the gatekeepers. We're the ones that sort of you submit your pitch deck, you submit your pitch, you say I want to be presenting to the HBS Alumni Association. And the selection committee would sort of go through all of the pitches that we received, all the decks, et cetera, and decide, first of all, who is it that we liked enough based on what we got, that it was worth sort of putting those people in front of the larger membership as a whole. And then those people would get to present in person. And so part of it was, you sort of get this flood of here's pitches coming in all the time. And so It was great for me because I had an opportunity to get a huge a front seat view of here's all the stuff that people are working on at any given time. And you're just reading pitches all day, all the time. But you start to see patterns. You start to see what people are doing well. You start to see what people aren't doing well, whether or not they're hitting sort of the key fundamentals that would get them to have us first there's a 2-step thing. There's coming in and then we review them. Then there's which of those do we think we should, as a selection committee, discuss? Right. And so then there's the first tranche. And then once we go through that, we may go and say that there's 10 or so that we are going to discuss. And of the 10 that we discuss, maybe 4 get to present. And so there's the initial screening. How do we go from 100 to 10? How do we go from 10 to 4? And those processes tell you a lot about, what's good, what's bad, what's missing.
Okay, that's good insight, because sometimes if you've ever been in sales, high-end enterprise sales, you'll know it's important to understand how the decision-making is made. Okay, you may sell and convince your champion, but then if you don't know in a large enterprise how to actually get a purchase order issued, sometimes that can trip you up and slow you down. And what Tony's, I think, sharing about here is a little bit of the back office stuff. So tell us a little bit more. How many submissions would you get typically in the Northern California chapter or in the alumni group as a whole?
It really depended, and it's one of those things where I would love to tell you that it was consistent, but
Mhm.
it's one of those things where there were some quarters where you would get a lot of submissions, and then there were some quarters where you didn't get as many submissions, and I'll tell you why that's important, because at the end of the day, again, it comes down to sort of our funnel in terms of what do we have the capacity to review as a selection committee. So let's say that we can review at any of the meetings 10 different companies. Well,
Mhm.
if you get 40 good companies, that's very different than if you get 15 good companies.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it goes the other way, which is, what if you don't get very many good companies at all? Then
Right.
it sort of becomes easier being a weak submission, but still making it all the way through the screening, because it's all relative. It's like, who are the top 10 from any given group? So
Okay.
sometimes, there's no way to predict timing wise whether or not you're submitting at a time when there's a lot of people submitting or when there's a little. But I will say that as a result, sometimes it makes sense to apply more than once if you don't get through, because it may be that you apply once and you've got a really strong group that applied at the same time. You
Right.
apply another time and maybe you stand out a little bit differently, either different segments that we're looking for or something like that. And so it does make sense sometimes to say, let me try another time and see what can happen.
Got it. Is there a specific cadence that the group had? Like every 3 months you would do an in-person pitch event or something?
Once a quarter.
Once a quarter.
Yeah. So we would do an event, and for me, one of the challenges, and I think different angel groups. I know different angel groups because I do some work with some of the other angel groups like Bay Angels, and I've worked a little bit with Sandhill Angels and some of these other groups. But the problem with a quarterly system is that for founders, often they have their own timetable. Like,
Yeah.
what it's November right now. I know that I need to raise my money by January. Well, that sort of sucks if we just had our quarterly meeting and our next quarterly meeting isn't until January. And so the problem is you also sort of lose some opportunities just because quarterly doesn't necessarily line up with the opportunities of everybody who's trying to raise money.
Right. Right. Okay. Is there a cadence that we can share so that people here
Yeah.
know the next session
Well,
is going to be at
yeah.
this time?
So it is quarterly. I don't know when the next quarter is, but usually it sort of lines up with there's usually sort of a December, January meeting, and then sort of every 3 months after that. I think they just had a presentation. I want to say it was about a month ago, maybe a month and a half ago. So it might
Okay.
be 3 months from then.
Okay.
But
Got
but
it.
if you
Okay.
if you if you if you go to their website, I'm just going to say, do they have they I can't remember if we showed sort of the dates of the last things, but typically I would say, if you can sort of time it as submitting, if you need to raise money sort of first quarter of the year, sort of a January-ish, February-ish submission probably makes sense.
Mhm.
And then just sort of, or you can inquire. And they used to use Gust. And so, but there's usually links all over the place that you can find for where to apply. And I know that there are links on the HBS Alumni Northern California website.
Got it. Okay. Fantastic. So during when you got a submission, can you talk about what it is that your selection committee looked for? Everybody's got different criteria, but what was your criteria?
What was nice about the committee is that everybody had a slightly different perspective, and some people had very different sets of expertise in terms of industries and backgrounds and that sort of thing. At the high level, what we were looking for were a couple of things. One is, in honesty, do we think that it was going to appeal to the membership at large, and were there particular themes that we might be looking for in any particular season? And so, but then sort of at a different level, just fundamentally, we were looking for what is the team composition? Do they have some expertise and experience in terms of who's in the founding team? What have they done so far to de-risk the venture? And I'll say that de-risking the venture is different than how much traction do they have necessarily. So it is, what have they done beyond what I call sort of the BISS, which is because I said so. Sometimes you get the founders who sort of make these proclamations about the market, and this is what I'm going to do and all these other things, but there seems to be no evidence beyond their opinion that it's a great idea that in the deck. And so it becomes, what can you show us that gives some credibility to the idea that the market cares about what you're doing? And what have you done to sort of show that you've done some of the base homework? Because part of it is you want to make sure that you're talking to founders who at least are putting in the effort, not just dialing it in. Like, I understand I don't have a lot of cash, but that doesn't mean that I can't do the work to go, does this even make sense to pursue? Do I understand who the competitors are? Do I understand sort of the market dynamics? Have I thought about a business model? Because you find that a lot of the submissions are missing some big piece. Like, some of them will be missing a business model, or have their economics together. Some of them won't have well thought out forecasts. Some of them won't have talked to the potential market people, or figured out what are the legal ramifications or the qualifications, or those kinds of things. And so we want to see essentially homework, and I'll say the potential for this idea to translate into a business. Because again, one of the places where sometimes founders fall down is they've got a great idea, but they have problems making that gap between this is an idea and this is a business. And at the end of the day, investors are in it for themselves. I'm trying to make money. And so if I don't understand what the economics are that help this venture increase in value, that means that I don't know how my investment's going to get bigger, and I don't know how it gets to an exit. And so that makes it interesting. So it has to not just be a good idea, but one that can translate into a business that's going to change in value over time.
Right, right. I've said many times before, people always search and hunt for the elusive product market fit. But what does that really mean? To me, product market fit is three things: market desirability, product feasibility, and the third is business viability. Very much in line with what Tony's talking about here. I've seen lots of businesses that look like they would be a great nonprofit. Okay.
Which is not great. Yes.
Yes, not when you're asking for investor money. Maybe if that's what if that's the trajectory of your business and you don't realize it, what you're really asking for is a donation. Okay.
Exactly. And it's interesting because for me, one of the things that you talk about product market fit. Product market fit is this weird thing in sort of startups in general, which is everybody talks about it, but a lot of people don't understand it. Right. And so I regularly run into founders that on some intuitive level, or because they've heard it, know that they're after product market fit. But it's, when you ask them what that means exactly, it's like that old adage about porn, which is, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. And so for me, I like to make it a little bit more concrete. And so I've developed a framework for thinking about product market fit, which says, rather than trying to look at product market fit as being one big amorphous thing, I look at product market fit as actually being sort of 8 separate fits that each need to be addressed in order to get to product market fit.
That's fantastic. This is the stuff that I love about working with Tony, is that it's not just high level concepts, there's detail. So it's not just what, it's how. And going through these eight topics, I think it sounds very beneficial to leading us to how. So if I can share one thing here, since the topic came up a moment ago about applying, you go to the Harvard Business School Angels, hbsangels.com, and you have the umbrella website basically that you see here. Right. And then if you go down to the chapters, they list the individual sub-chapters. Geographically,
the Eastman at the top middle, Yasmin Clemens, that's the Northern California chapter.
Right. So if we click the Northern California chapter, it takes you to a related web page, and it gives you detail about that particular chapter. And here in the specific chapter, you would apply. So there's a question in the chat window: are you able to apply to more than one chapter?
You can, yeah, because sort of the dirty little secret is, for the most part, unless you sort of make it sort of through to the final, end of the funnel, the chapters aren't particularly good about sort of talking to one another. Like, we don't talk to other chapters about who we got submitted, but sometimes there are these syndication calls between chapters. If, for example, somebody makes it through the funnel as a highly regarded company, and it turns out to be something that they want to share with other chapters. But I don't think that applying to more than one chapter at that point would hold anybody back. Now,
Right.
that said, the reason why there are multiple chapters is angels tend to, maybe more so than VCs, care about locality. And so, angels typically want to be, at least many of them, able to sort of get in their car, drive over, and sort of check you out. And so, the reason there are chapters is Bay Area angels tend to invest in Bay Area companies. New York companies and angels invest in New York companies. So if you apply to other chapters, typically what will happen is, because you're not local, even though we're in the day and age of people doing things by Zoom chat, you are going to be less appealing to the angels that sort of go, but you're not nearby. I can't come by, see you, look at you face to face. Especially now that COVID's over, we're back to, I'd love to sort of look at you and say, are you an Elizabeth Holmes or a Sam Bankman-Fried, or can I trust you?
Yes, absolutely. So maybe one question before we start opening up to questions from the chat. So go ahead and use the chat, post your questions there. But one other thing here is talk to us about typical investment profile processes, et cetera. And what I mean by this is, at what stage do the investors usually invest? Maybe what is the check size individually, or do you guys pool together in a syndicate? How is that typically structured?
HBS Angels are and again, it depends on sort of different angel groups, but HBS Angels is not sort of this cohesive unit. And so it's not like, we put together an SPV and sort of everybody will put in the money and you get one person on your cap table. And so as a group, what happens is they'll present, again, you sort of make it through to the point where you get to present to the membership at large. Once you presented, there's everybody signs up as, interested. And then usually there's a due diligence call that's scheduled. And the investors that are interested can sort of jump on the call, ask their questions, get a little bit more information from the founder about what's going on. But typically after that, it is sort of left to the individual investor to sort of follow up on their own and decide whether or not they're going to invest. So there's not or at least until the last I saw, there's not sort of been a single process to try and coordinate all the angels that are involved in any particular investment. Now that said, to answer the other part of your question, check sizes range. They can be individually anywhere from probably on the low end, $10,000, upwards. And depending on sort of what the deal is and who the investor is, it can go up to 100,000 or more. I don't know what the average is in terms of what HBS Angels invests, so I can't answer that. But it is really almost, it's almost like herding cats more than anything else. You present. What presenting the HBS Angels does is it gives you an opportunity to invest, to present to multiple investors, but you should treat them and think of them as individual potential investors. And so everybody sort of requires their own handholding. There's not one central person that you should talk to that sort of coordinates it. Some groups like Band of Angels, oh my God, these guys are like the gold standard to me of like coordinated, accountable, they're a machine in terms of how they handle companies that are sort of coming to them for investment. They are coordinated. They do keep track of these things. But HBS, again, it's more sort of it's the opportunity to have an audience that you get, but it's not sort of the coordinated single group that you get to talk to.
Got it. So if you missed it, we had Richard Pivnicka from Band of Angels last session. I will post a replay of that if you're interested. That was definitely a very informative session. But it's very good to be able to understand here what Tony's basically saying. The HBS Angels is one-to-many for the application and the pitch process, but one-to-one for the negotiation of the actual investment. Okay. Right. So it helps you to be able to scale, but still, if you're tracking this in your investor pipeline, and you should have an investor pipeline, you would, once you get past the group pitch and individual angels express an interest, each individual angel should have a line on your pipeline.
And it's interesting that you brought up Richard. So, and I think I commented on one of your posts. But like there's a group of us, I call them the old men. We have dinner once a quarter, and Richard is one of the five of us that get together, and we sort of talk about the things that we're seeing in terms of deals and what's going on in the venture cycle. But Richard stands out to me, as a note that all angel investors are not created equal. Because one of the things I love about Richard is if he decides to invest in a company, he becomes like their number one cheerleader. Like when we have these dinners, he'll tell us like, here's a company that I like, and we'll talk about things that he's interested in, and he will promote like anybody's business. And I don't know that all angels are like that. In fact, I know there a lot of them are not. A lot of them are sort of like, I put my money in, I don't really care. That's about promoting it to other people. But when you're looking at angels, one of the characteristics that should be important is, are they willing to sort of help, get more people involved? Are they willing to sort of give their time a little bit to sort of help steer you a little bit? Richard is one of those people that, like, if you get him, you get more than just money. And so it's one of those things
That's
you
fantastic.
consider.
That's great. That's great. So let's open it up for Q&A here. We'll go through the chat window. There was a question about, let's see. There was a question about applying for one chapter. We were answering that. Oh, by the way, I just pasted into the chat window the replay of the Meet an Investor with Richard Pivnica. Okay, so it's up on YouTube. Go ahead and check that out. I think there's some really interesting insights that Richard shared during that session. So I encourage you to make sure you're familiar with it, to make sure you don't get tripped up by some of his recommendations. Okay, so Scott Trailer asked, what are you learning about the latest crop of startup pitches you're receiving now compared to the recent past?
Okay, so full disclosure, right now I'm not on the committee, so I'm not getting deals from HBS Angels. But in terms of what I'm seeing in general, because I'm still seeing a lot of deals, the sort of the amusing thing is a lot of the deals feel like they were startups before OpenAI decided to sort of throw open the AI gates back last November, and so it feels like everybody and their mother took whatever they were doing and slapped the word AI on the back of it. Sort of like when blockchain became a thing. Everybody at the time suddenly had a startup that was somehow involved in blockchain. One of the things that we're seeing that bears some thought is people are sort of showing up and trying to ride the AI wave by sort of just insinuating that somehow AI is making their business better. But one of the things that is troubling is they often have a hard time sort of making the case of why AI specifically is meaningful in what they're doing, and in a way that helps to sort of make them more competitive or add to the proprietary nature, or increase the value of the outcome that they provide to their users. So I will say that the baseline remains constant over time, which is when people are presenting, it always is imperative that startup founders make the case for why does this need to exist, and what is the outcome that it is going to create for my market that is meaningful. And so just because you throw on the word AI, if AI doesn't sort of increase the value of the output that you're creating, or the outcome that you're creating for your user, don't throw it in there just because you think that, oh, they're going to think it's sexy and it's going to make it to the top of the pile because I've got AI and someone else doesn't. In fact, when there is a flood of things like this that are happening, investors actually become more suspicious because they know that people are just doing it randomly. So it really becomes a prove to me that you understand why this is meaningful, and not just something that you're throwing on because you think it's going to bamboozle me. But I think that one of the things that's been really interesting is since the dawn of sort of no code, you get more sort of MVP kinds of things which are done, which are great, because I think that companies that can create something and put it in front of an audience and show that the audience will engage with it the way that they think or are proposing or forecasting that they think it will, I think that makes a lot of sense. Now, if you're asking about industries, it continues to run the gamut. You see a lot of social impact stuff. People are still trying to sort of address climate change. I've started seeing probably more devices than I'm typically used to seeing. and there's I was going to say there's a lot of ideas that are okay in marketplaces and sort of interact. I'll call them SaaS applications, but where the problem is there's a lack of there's often a lack of a good answer to the question, why does the market need this? There seems to be a lot of I'll call it technology in search of a problem. Like people build
Right.
stuff because they can, but I think that that's the wrong way to approach it. And so we're still seeing a lot of people that submit things that it seems okay, but it doesn't feel necessary. And so I think that if there's one thing founders can do to sort of increase their chances of being fundable, it's to have a story that really is good at explaining who it is that you're trying to serve, what is the outcome, and in particular, how is the outcome that your product or service creates? How is it compared to the status quo? In other words, right now, your potential market is solving whatever problem they have in a particular way. It may not be the best way, but it's a way. And what founders universally are doing is they're saying to their audience, I am making a request of you to change your behaviors. Something that you were doing before, I want you to do it differently. And I know you don't know me from a hole in the wall, and I have no reputation, and I have no credibility, and I have nothing. And founders often just don't do a good enough job of giving me a reason to take a risk or make a change. And so it is about, how do you say this difference is going to matter to you in a way that's worth taking the risk on me?
Got it. Yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing all that. And maybe I can wrap this up here with a couple of things. We'll take one other question, but while looking through the chat window, let me share one thing, because you said something that's very significant, and we see it in a lot of our training as well. So we do a lot of startup coaching. We have an academy and a self-paced version of the training. Academy is live instruction. Self-paced, of course, is video on demand. We have a subset of our content in the academy where the self-paced can get the all current and future training, but we include office hours in the academy. It's a bolt-on on the self-paced. But what it comes down to is, when a lot of times people come to us with a pitch deck and say, help us with the pitch deck. And surprisingly, probably 40% of my effort goes into basically rewriting some basic content that Tony just shared. Understanding the opportunity. What is the problem you're solving? Who are you serving? These are basic concepts to communicate. I think it was Lee Iacocca that said, it doesn't matter if you have a great idea. If you can't communicate it, it's not going to get you anywhere. Okay. So make sure that you invest well, get folks like Tony. One of the things I loved about Tony is that he explains things very clearly, and hopefully you saw that in this conversation here. So we'll wrap up with one final question. Let's see. Actually, I don't, there's some repeat questions about the industries and focus. Tony, is there something that maybe people didn't ask that you'd like to talk about? We'll wrap up with that.
You know what, and it's interesting because one of the things you and I talked about a little bit was, storytelling and messaging. And I'll just sort of wrap up and say that one of the things that I think founders need to embrace more is understanding the concept of what's in it for me. Meaning that, everybody that they talk to has an agenda, has a desire, has an aspiring outcome. That could be people they're trying to recruit. That could be investors. That could be their target audience. And most founders often have sort of this founder perspective on what they're doing, and they don't often take enough time to sort of put themselves empathically in the other person's shoes and understand what's in it for them. So if I'm talking to investors, I think that it is critical for founders to go, what is the investor perspective? What are they trying to get out of investing? What is it that would make this appealing to them? Which is different than if I'm talking to a prospective customer and I'm trying to go, what is it that they want? And because I often see founders that tell the same story for their pitch deck for their investors as they do for their business development, as they do, like they try to use one story across all tableaus,
Right,
which
right,
you can't do.
right.
And I think that it's important to always go, I need to understand from that other person's standpoint what's in it for them. And then beyond that, and this is another place where people kind of get confused, enterprise sales, I don't care that it's an enterprise. Enterprise sales are still a sale to an individual. And again, founders sort of get this intimidation. I'm selling to Xerox, or I'm selling to Salesforce, or I'm selling to some other company. But at the end of the day, there's a purchaser. There's someone who you're talking to who has their own agenda, which is, I don't want to look stupid for making the decision to become a customer. I want this to make be something that helps me get promoted. I want to do something that makes my department day-to-day managing easier. So I think that the number one thing that any founder can do is, if I'm talking to any group, whether it's investors, recruits, or whatever, because again, even if you're recruiting, people are going, what are my growth opportunities? How much money can I make? Do I get equity? So every group you talk to has a different agenda. If you can just sort of have a centric view from that person's viewpoint, customer-centric, team-centric, investor-centric, I think that one change will make a tremendous difference in how effective your communication can be with any one of those groups.
Right. It's kind of like the old adage, when you're playing poker, you're not playing the cards, you're playing the player.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
I'm surprised often at how often that is the place where I see founders miss the most. I will see founders that are presenting to an investor group, and the pitch itself is so not targeted to that investor group or to investors in general, that it boggles my mind that they never thought to get out of founder perspective and go into investor perspective. And again, if you just even reread your slides and go, I don't know what I know about me, I don't have my own confidence, I'm sort of a stranger, and I'm sitting on the other side of the table, I've got a pocket full of money, and I'm trying to make sure of the 100 companies I look at, how do I pick the one I'm going to invest in? Because that's the thing founders don't understand. VC firms look at 100 decks for every one company they invest in. And so you have to appeal to something in them that's going to resonate with what am I going to get out of this one company out of the 100? And if you can just be better at that, I think that they'll find that their results tenfold.
Yeah. Yeah. This wasn't part of the plan, but since you brought this up, Tony, I'm sharing a slide from one of my training classes on how to sell and fundraise. This is kind of my minimum viable sales training class.
Right.
One of the 4 sales methodologies that I summarize in this class is strategic selling from Miller Heinan. It's a system that I basically cut my teeth on. One of the 6 elements of the strategic selling methodology, lower left-hand corner, win results. And the question is, how does the outcome affect them? So there's the result, which is the impact on the buyer's business. And then there's the win, the impact on the buyer themselves. So
Right.
combination of the two, the win result is what you need to pay attention to. And that's exactly what Tony said. Excellent summary of a 1/6 of a 300-page book. All right. So thank you very much. I apologize.
This stuff isn't complicated, but it
Right.
is, it's not always easy to actually do in practice, which is why when I set up, the group program for Founders Forge, that is just about getting initial traction, I really needed to narrow down, sort of one outcome, which is just, how do you go from not 0 to 60, but how do you go from 0 to 10? Because it's that breaking that initial inertia that is where founders have the most difficulty. Because again, they are coming at it with no reputation, with no credibility, and they come at it, whether they know it or not, as a high risk option. And so there you have to understand, how do you address enterprise as a high risk option and get people to sort of take a chance on you? And you talk about sort of selling strategies. You cut your teeth on yours. I worked at Xerox in sales many, many years ago. And so I had the whole spin selling framework.
Absolutely.
And again, it was that whole thing about understanding what's their situation, the problem, the implications. And again, implications are even about, how does this impact the individual making the purchase decisions? And if you don't understand that, you will never be able to convert that person, because you need to be able to address not only their aspirations, but their obstacles.
Yes. So spin selling is another one of the four selling methodologies that is covered in this class. What Tony just mentioned was the questioning process: situation, problem, implications, need, payoff. So it's funny that we're talking about this. This was not planned or orchestrated, but these are systems that absolutely work. And I will say this, and in closing here, make sure you learn how to sell well. Okay. There is a quote actually from Nitin Noria, the former dean of Harvard Business School. I'm going to pop this up since we have Tony here and he's ex HBS. I don't know if you share this opinion, but right here, okay, from Nitin, okay, the number one skill HBS alums wish they had spent more time understanding was at school was how to sell.
It's interesting that you say that, because selling, what I find in the founders that I work with, selling tends to be one of those things that creates a huge amount of anxiety in founders, especially, not just technical founders, but any founder who hasn't before been in a sales or marketing position. And it's
Right.
largely, we get triggered because we have an association of being sold to. If you've ever had to sit through a timeshare presentation where you feel like something's being pushed on you. And
Right.
so the difference in terms of go-to-market and early adopters and initially selling is the ability to not say, I'm going to try and push on people. It's sort of like, I went to college with Seth Godin, and Seth Godin talks about sort of permission selling and sort of, you're not for everybody. The secret really as a startup is, how do I understand the segment, the early adopters that I don't have to really sell to in the way that triggers me? And if you are really good at identifying sort of their aspirational outcomes, their status quo, their pain point, you don't have to sell. And so the thing that causes you anxiety, this sense of I have to persuade people, I have to negotiate people, that goes away, because if you got it right in the first place, all you have to do is sort of show up and to the right person at the right time with the right offer. It's sort of like if you've got an impacted molar and I show up with something that's going to make the pain go away, like, you don't care. I don't have to sell you on it. But if I show up and say, you've got perfectly good teeth, and I'm trying to sell you something because one day you might have an impacted molar, but I'm going to convince you about how painful it's going to be. And it kills me that I hear founders all the time use persuade and convince. And I go, in the beginning, that should never be your role. In the beginning, your role should be create something that attracts. And if they can do that well, those early sales actually are not as hard as they think they're going to be. But because they're sort of in this, I'm going to push, I'm going to sell mode, A, it's hard to do, and B, it's very uncomfortable because they've never sold before. They're not used to sort of the numbers game of close rate of 10% means that I have to have 10 conversations for one sale. All of those things are very off-putting for founders, but it doesn't have to be quite that way.
Yeah. It's kind of funny because we're scheduled for half an hour, but we keep having more golden nuggets pop out. So we just keep talking, which is great. I mean, I feel like we could talk for another hour, but we do probably need to be able to wrap things up.
Okay.
Basically, if you found some value in this, reach out to Tony. Maybe you can get his help directly through the Founders Forge. We're happy to help you with our online academies as well as our self-paced training. We also have coaching and done for you projects as well. So thank you very much for joining us. I'm serious, Tony. We're gonna have to figure out some way to get you back here and extract some more brain cells from you. Okay.
I'm glad it was useful, Sam.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right.
Have a good one, everybody.
Okay. Bye.